The old man walked in slow, careful steps like the floor might give out beneath him. His hand reached toward the corner table, the one near the window, the one that had always been his, but before he could pull the chair back, her voice cracked through the room. "Don't touch that. You don't sit there." Not a suggestion, a command. The air stiffened the way summer heat just hangs before a storm. Every eye in the place flicked over to him, then quickly looked away. He blinked, once said nothing. She didn't move either, just stood there, arms folded like she was guarding a throne. He took the chair anyway, slowly, quietly. She didn't know no one did that. The man she just dismissed owned the chair, the table, the floor she stood on, and today he'd come back not as a boss but as a customer. He sat down anyway, slowly, like he'd done it 100 times. The menu was the same faded fingerprints on every corner. He stared at it, not really reading, just thinking. This used to be mine, he thought. Still is. But something's wrong. Harlan wasn't there to eat. He was there because too many letters had piled up, too many complaints from strangers, and a few from people who once called him a friend. Bad service, cold faces, tip-shaming, and the worst one, your staff makes people like us feel small. So he put on the old jacket, the fake glasses let his hair grow gray, and walked in, not as the man on the wall in the back office, but as a man no one wanted to serve. That was the trap, to see what they'd say when they thought he was nobody. And soon someone would take that bait hard. The table he sat at still had the scratch from when his dad dropped his wedding ring. It had never been sanded out. Harlan liked that. Maple and hearth, his father had said, warmth and wood. That's what a home and a business is built on. That name meant something once. It wasn't just a logo. It was Sunday breakfasts and quiet anniversaries and old couples holding hands across chipped plates. But now Harlan wasn't sure anymore. The place still smelled like butter and coffee, but the soul of it, the why, felt like it had drifted. He had built a franchise. They had built distance. And now he wanted to know, were they still serving food with heart or just getting through the shift? He looked around, eyes landing on each server. One of them smiled. Another avoided his gaze. And then she walked in. She moved like she owned the floor, quick, sharp, with that kind of confidence that leaves no room for softness. Leora, name tag tilted, jaw set. Harlan watched her from behind the menu. She didn't smile. Not once. Not when she greeted the young couple at booth 3, not when she handed off coffee to the man in a veteran's cap, only nodded, only moved. People around her grew quieter when she passed, not out of respect, but because she pulled warmth out of the room like a draft through a cracked window. Harlan remembered hiring people like her. Smart, fast. But something was off here. Not tiredness, something colder. She walked by his table, eyes flicked, didn't stop. No water, no welcome, just air. She wasn't the only server in the room, but she was the one you couldn't unsee. And Harlan. He had a feeling she was the storm he came in to face. But just as Leora passed him like wind, someone else stepped into the frame. Cedric Young, maybe late 20s, clean apron, soft eyes, and a smile. One of those rare ones that doesn't ask for anything back. He knelt beside a little boy struggling with a straw, said something funny. The boy giggled. His dad smiled too. The tired kind of smile that said, "Thank you for seeing us." Harlan kept watching. Cedric wasn't just doing his job. He noticed people. He refilled waters before being asked, remembered someone's name, put a napkin under an uneven table leg like it mattered, and just 2 booths away. Leora breezed by another table like it was beneath her. The contrast was loud. One warmed the space. The other chilled it. Harlan felt it in his bones, that quiet tug-of-war between what this place was and what it was becoming, and deep down he was scared which side might be winning. His thoughts broke when the front bell jingled. An older man stepped in, cardigan buttoned, wrong cap slightly off-center. He moved slowly like each step asked permission. Harlan recognized that walk. It was the walk of someone who didn't expect to be welcomed. The man glanced around, spotted an open seat near the wall, took a hesitant step. Leora got there first. "You can't sit there." Not cruel, just flat cold like glass. The man paused, opened his mouth, closed it again, then nodded, turned, sat in the farthest booth near the restrooms. No one said a word. Not the hostess, not the other servers, just Cedric, who looked up for a moment, then down again, jaw clenched. Harlan didn't move. But something inside him did, because what he saw wasn't just poor service. It was something uglier, a world where being old made you invisible. And that to him was the first real crack. Harlan didn't speak, but something in his jaw tightened. That man, the cardigan, the cap, the quiet way he turned when Leora dismissed him. It hit too close. Years ago, he'd taken his mother out for lunch on her birthday. She wore her best coat, the blue one, the one with the missing button. They'd waited 20 minutes before anyone brought a menu. Waitress never looked her in the eye, never smiled, and Harlan had said nothing. Back then, he didn't want to make a scene. But that silence, it stayed, lodged itself under his ribs. He had built this chain so no one would ever feel that kind of small again. Yet here he was, watching it happen on his own floor, under his own name. His fingers tapped the menu slowly, not out of impatience, but to hold back something else. He wasn't just witnessing poor service. He was reliving something he promised himself he would never let happen twice. The sting of that memory still sat in his chest when the door opened again. A group walked in, loud, laughing, polished designer coats, teeth two white voices that carried. Harlan watched as Leora turned. No eye roll, no sharpness this time. She smoothed her apron, tucked her hair behind one ear. "Hi there. Welcome in." She almost sang it. Harlan's eyes narrowed. It wasn't the friendliness that bothered him. It was the selectiveness of it. They were seated immediately. Fresh coffee came before they even asked. She lingered at their table, laughing along. One of them made a joke about tipping while she laughed harder. Meanwhile, the old man from earlier still didn't have a glass of water. Harlan looked back and forth. 2 tables, same server, different treatment. That table was gold. The other just dust. And in that difference, Harlan saw exactly where things had gone wrong. The golden table laughed on, loud and easy. But, at the far end, someone else was struggling. Martha alone, dressed neat but old, the kind of old that makes people speak louder around you. Her hand shook as she lifted her spoon. The soup chicken noodle too full tipped and spilled over onto her tray down her wrist across the table. She froze, eyes darted around, embarrassed. Not a word, not a call for help, just a soft gasp, like maybe if she stayed still enough she'd disappear. Leora saw it, walked past, didn't stop, didn't ask, just raised one brow and muttered, "Christ," then kept walking. Harlan caught it all every second. He looked at Martha's trembling hands, then at the puddle cooling on the table, and wondered how many more like her had sat here, spilled something, and learned that silence hurts worse than being told off. Some things aren't loud, but they still scream. Before Harlan could get up, the door opened again. A young couple entered, Arvid and Noelia. Nervous smiles, hands clutched together. Their English was soft, careful. They sat down at the booth next to Martha, tried to order, halting, uncertain. Noelia pointed at the menu. Arvid repeated the dish name syllable by syllable. Leora stepped over, arms crossed. Didn't wait, didn't try. "If you don't know what you want, come back when you do," she said, sharp as glass. Noelia blinked. Arvid lowered his head. They got up slowly, quietly left the booth as if apologizing to it. Nobody said a thing. No laughter now. Even the golden table quieted for a second. Harlan stared at the door as it closed behind them, and something settled in his stomach. Not just anger. Shame, because kindness wasn't being forgotten here. It was being selected. They were replaced minutes later by a dad and his kid. Ephraim, maybe early 30s. Ball cap work shirt, tired. His son couldn't have been more than 6. They sat down quietly, shared a burger, split a milkshake. When the check came, the dad counted out bills, slowly left 2 crumpled ones on the tray. It was all he had. Leora picked it up. Didn't say thank you. Didn't even say goodbye. Just looked down at the tip, then back at him. that look flat, disgusted. A silent, "Really?" Ephraim didn't meet her eyes, but the kid did. He watched her walk away, then turned to his dad and whispered something neither of them laughed at. Harlan watched that child's face and knew that look would stay with him. Long after the milkshake, long after he forgot what the burger tasted like, he'd remember how it felt to watch someone make his father feel small. The air was getting heavy. Even the laughter at the far table had dulled. Harlan hadn't moved. He didn't need to. His eyes followed every detail, every pause, every pattern. And then he saw Cedric again, moving quietly with a rag in his hand. Martha was trying to clean up the soup herself, shaking overwhelmed. He didn't ask, didn't make a show of it, just bent down and helped, wiped the mess folded, the napkin, gave a nod, and moved on. No words, no spotlight. But Martha looked after him like he just handed her something she'd lost years ago. It wasn't grand, it wasn't loud, but it mattered more than anything. Harlan exhaled. For the first time in an hour, he felt the smallest flicker of something close to hope. And as Cedric turned the corner, Harlan caught Leora on the other side of the room, arms flailing, voice rising. Leora stood near the kitchen pass, voice low but sharp. She wasn't talking to customers this time. She was aiming at her own co-workers. "You see that table, $2 tip for $40. What's the point?" The hostess shrugged, muttered something. Leora didn't care. "These people think we live off smiles. Nah, I'm not going to fake it for free." Harlan heard every word, and for a second, just one, he didn't feel angry. He felt something else, because that tone wasn't just bitter, it was tired, and tired does things to people. Still, her eyes said more than her mouth did. They didn't hold exhaustion. They held contempt. Contempt for the old man who spilled for the couple who struggled to order for the dad who tipped too little. Harlan had been in this business long enough to know burnout doesn't always sound like a cry for help. Sometimes it just sounds like hate, and that was even harder to fix. Right after her outburst, a man approached the hostess stand. Mid-70s maybe. Wore a plaid shirt and khakis that didn't quite fit. He asked quietly if he could switch to a booth. Said his back hurt. Said the high chairs bothered his hip. Before the hostess could answer, Leora cut in from across the room. "This isn't a hotel. You sit where you're seated. No eye contact, no kindness, just policy." The man blinked, confused. He didn't argue, didn't push. He just nodded and went back to the table he was assigned. Sat down slowly, hands folded in his lap like a boy being scolded in church. Harlan clenched his teeth. This wasn't about tips now. This wasn't even about service. It was about stripping people of their dignity one small moment at a time. And the worst part, most of the room didn't even notice. But Harlan did, and every unnoticed moment was stacking up like debt. He had seen enough. But it wasn't the scenes in the restaurant that broke him. It was the voice in his head, his father's voice. Don't ever look down on a customer's son. Doesn't matter what they wear or what they order. That's someone's parent, someone's story. Harlan shut his eyes for a second. It hit harder now because this wasn't someone else's restaurant. This was his. He built this place from scratch, named it, after the way the fireplace crackled in their family cabin. Maple and hearth warmth and wood, that was the promise. But where was the warmth now? He opened his eyes slowly, and all he saw was quiet injustice simmering unnoticed and repeated. His chest felt tight. Not from anger, not yet from heartbreak, because somewhere along the way they had stopped serving people and started sorting them. Just then, a tray dropped. The clatter echoed sharp across the floor. A teenage boy at table 5 had knocked over a stack of plates trying to squeeze into his seat. For a moment, everything paused, and then Cedric moved quick, calm, easy. He crouched down beside the kid, gently helped gather the silverware, said something quiet that made the boy smile. It was seamless kindness without announcement. Across the room, Leora didn't move. She stood, watching, arms folded tight across her chest. Then, just the smallest smirk, not of humor, of dismissal, like she was watching someone waste their energy on people who didn't matter. Harlan saw both side by side. It was all there, the quiet war between indifference and care, between bitterness and belief. And in that moment, Harlan stopped observing. He started deciding. He stood up slowly. No announcement, no theatrics. Martha had dropped part of her biscuit pieces crumbled on the floor beneath her feet. She didn't bend down. She just stared at them as if bending would be too much, not just for her knees, but for her pride. Harlan walked over. No one noticed, not right away. Not until he knelt carefully slowly and began picking up each piece. His hands shook. Age wasn't something he could fake anymore, but they were steady where it counted. Martha looked down, startled. She opened her mouth to speak, to stop him, to apologize. He just gave her a nod, a soft one, quiet, and for a second it felt like time held its breath. Someone at a nearby table turned, then another, a few eyes, then all of them, because the old man was doing something none of them expected, and someone wasn't going to like it. Then it came, loud, sharp, final. "I told you not to touch that." Leora's voice slammed across the room. Not a whisper of hesitation, not a drop of grace. Heads turned like something had cracked. Forks froze. Conversation died mid-sentence. Even Cedric looked up from the far end of the floor napkin still in hand. Leora stood rigid behind the counter, arms, locked lips not soft anymore, not curious, just still. Martha looked at him horrified, as if she had dragged him into something she didn't mean to start. But Harlan didn't move. He didn't speak, and in that pause, that 5-second silence that felt like 100, the room filled with something that had been missing all along: accountability. For a moment, no one moved. Eyes darted from Harlan to Leora and back again. The old man was still kneeling, still holding that biscuit like it was more than bread. Then, slowly, he stood. No rush, no panic, just a deep breath and the kind of silence that says, "I'm done waiting." He placed the crumbled pieces on Martha's plate gently, like returning something that was taken. Then he set his hand on the back of the chair and leaned on it, not because he needed to, but because he wanted the moment to stretch. He looked around, table by table, face by face. And when his eyes landed on Leora, they didn't shake. They didn't rise. They held. No one knew what he was going to say, but everyone knew this wasn't just a man who got yelled at. This was something else, something bigger. The chair made a soft noise as he pushed it in. Harlan stood fully now, shoulders straight, chin set. His voice didn't come loud. It came slow, measured. Enough. No yelling, no show, just that word, and the silence that wrapped around it. Leora blinked. For the first time all day she looked unsure, took one step back, then stopped. Harlan kept his eyes on her, but his words reached the whole room. "That's enough." One more time, like drawing a line in the floor. Cedric stood frozen. A kid stopped chewing. Martha's eyes went glassy. Something in the air shifted. Not dramatic, not chaotic, but deep, like everyone could feel they had just arrived at the edge of something they didn't know they were part of, and something was about to be revealed. He took one more step forward, hands no longer shaking shoulders, no longer hunched, and then he spoke, not loud but clear enough for everyone to hear. "I'm not just some old man." There was no drama in the words, just truth. He reached up, took off his cap, and set it gently on the table beside Martha. Hair still gray, but the way he stood, it was different now. Then came the second line, the one that cracked the room. "I'm the owner of this place." Simple, flat, like stating the time of day. It echoed anyway. Someone at table 6 gasped. The young father dropped his spoon. Even the kitchen fell quiet. Harlan let it land. Didn't rush, didn't smile, just looked around at every face that had been watching and judging and choosing who mattered. The old man was gone now, and in his place stood the man they had all ignored. It hit like a ripple. One person whispered, then 2, then 5. "He owns this place. Wait, that's him." The name on the sign, the photo on the back wall. Suddenly, it all made sense. Leora's face went pale. not embarrassed exposed, she took one step back as if the truth had weight to it. Cedric, across the room, didn't say a word, but the smile that pulled at the edge of his mouth wasn't smug. It was relief. Like the truth had been sitting on his chest and someone had finally said it out loud. Harlan didn't gloat, didn't flex. He just stood in that silence like it belonged to him. And maybe it did, because for the first time all day, everyone knew exactly who was in charge. The silence was holding when Harlan turned fully toward Leora. She didn't speak, didn't blink, just stared. And then calmly, he asked the one question that weighed more than anything else said all day. Is this how you treat people? No accusation, no shouting, just a question that pulled the air out of the room. Leora didn't answer. She couldn't because it wasn't just a question to her. It was a question for everyone who had watched and said nothing. Every table that saw Martha struggle, every seat that heard Arvid get dismissed, every smile that faded under her stare. And in that moment, with the truth on the table, the only sound left was the sound of reckoning. She didn't fight back, didn't defend, didn't even look away. Leora just broke. Right there in front of everyone, she let her shoulders drop and her eyes fill. I work 3 jobs, she said quietly. I owe $30,000 in student loans. I haven't slept a full night in 2 years. No one spoke. She swallowed hard, voice cracking like dry wood. Most days I have to choose sleep or dinner, not both. There was no performance in it, no spin, just the raw, tired voice of someone who had nothing left to protect. It didn't excuse everything, but it explained something. Harlan didn't answer. He didn't have to, because in that moment the room was no longer looking at a villain. They were looking at someone who'd been carrying too much for too long. The silence this time felt different. Not heavy, but full. Full of something real, like truth had cracked the room open and no one knew how to look away. A woman near the back nodded, lips pressed tight. A man near the door whispered, "Damn." Cedric looked down, hands in his apron, and Martha, sweet quiet. Martha reached into her purse and pulled out a tissue. Not for herself, but for Leora. She didn't say anything, just passed it across the counter like an olive branch folded in paper. Laura took it, didn't speak either. But that moment, that small, gentle motion hit harder than any speech could. Harlan watched it unfold, and for the first time the room wasn't divided by anger anymore. It was held together by something close to mercy. Harlan stood there silent. Still, he didn't rush to forgive. Didn't jump in with lessons or lectures. He just breathed because something in Leora's voice had touched a part of him he hadn't looked at in a long time. He remembered the winter after his first store failed, how he'd parked 2 blocks away from the food bank just so no one he knew would see him go in. He remembered skipping meals to pay rent. He remembered borrowing gas money. He remembered shame that clung to his clothes like the smell of fried grease from the diner job he hated. He remembered being her, maybe not in the same shoes, but on the same road. And, standing there now, older, heavier, he realized something. The line between being the one who needs help and the one who gives it is thinner than people think. The weight in the room hadn't lifted, but it had shifted. Harlan walked across the floor slowly, not as a boss, not as a man with something to prove, just as a person who had finally seen something that couldn't be unseen. Leora was still holding the tissue still frozen in that fragile middle ground between regret and fear. He stopped beside her, laid one steady hand on her shoulder, and he said softly, "I know that pain. Not loud, not for anyone else, just for her. No pride, no lecture, just understanding." And in that moment, everything tightened behind her eyes. She didn't speak. She just nodded, barely, like the weight in her chest had cracked. Not broken, but enough to let some light through. And for the first time since he walked in, Harlan saw her not as the problem, but as someone who'd gone far too long without a break. He kept his hand there, not to comfort, but to steady the moment. Then he turned to the room. But kindness, he said, doesn't get to disappear just because life gets hard. His voice didn't rise, but it landed. No matter what you're carrying, you don't throw it at the people in front of you. Leora's chin trembled. She nodded once, twice. She wasn't defending anymore. She was listening. Harlan scanned the room. Martha Cedric, the young dad, the kitchen staff, everyone watching, waiting as if this was the moment they'd been hoping for, but didn't know how to ask for. And just for a second, nobody moved because every person in that room felt the shift. Not in policy, but in permission to be better. Then Harlan stepped forward again, this time to speak not just as a man, but as a leader. "Things are going to change," he said. Starting today, the air tensed again, but this time with something closer to hope than fear. No more tipping culture holding this place together with duct tape. No more gambling your rent on someone else's generosity. A murmur moved through the room. Cedric looked up, stunned. From now on, Harlan continued. "Everyone here gets paid fairly every shift, every week. No exceptions." One of the cooks peeked through the kitchen window. The hostess wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, and somewhere near the register, someone clapped. Just once, then again, then more. Not a standing ovation, not a performance, just people who finally felt like they were being heard by someone who had the power to actually do something. After the room settled, Harlan turned his gaze not toward Leora this time, but toward Cedric. The young server stood still by the coffee station, hands folded like he wasn't sure if he should stay or slip away. Harlan raised a hand and pointed gently. "You," he said. "You've been serving people with your heart, and I saw every moment of it." Cedric's eyes went wide, a breath caught in his chest. "You didn't need a name tag for me to notice. You treated strangers like they mattered. That's leadership. That's family." A hush fell again, but this time it felt warm, like watching someone get the thank you they never asked for. Cedric nodded once, then looked down. His eyes were wet. No spotlight, no speech, just a young man being reminded that quiet kindness counts. Harlan turned back to Leora. Her eyes met his, red, tired, but clearer now. No more hiding, no more armor. He walked closer. "You made mistakes," he said plainly, "but we all have." She didn't argue, didn't try to defend the past. She just stood there, waiting for the verdict. Harlan's voice softened. "You'll get training again, a chance to start fresh. But more than that, you'll get the support you never had before." Leora broke. Not loudly, just a breath, a sob that slipped through cracked pride. "Thank you," she whispered, hands shaking. "Thank you for not giving up on me." And with that, the arc bent not toward perfection, but toward something gentler possibility. Then someone clapped. Just one. Maybe Cedric. Maybe Martha. No one remembered, but then another and another. Within seconds, the sound filled the room, not loud and roaring, but steady, genuine from the gut applause. People stood. Martha did too, with a little help from her cane. The father at table 7 lifted his son so he could see better. The cooks leaned out from the kitchen smiling. And for the first time that day, this wasn't just a restaurant. It was a room full of people who had seen what redemption looked like in real time. Harlan didn't bow. He didn't smile wide. He just looked out at them, eyes tired but alive, and let the moment be what it was. A reminder that kindness once set in motion moves further than you think. The applause faded slowly, but the warmth lingered. Harlan stayed quiet, just standing there taking it all in, like watching a place become what it was always meant to be. He looked around the room at every chair, every table, the scuffed floor, the faded menu, the chipped booth corners. All of it had held stories. All of it still did. Then he said, almost to himself, "This is the family I meant to build." No spotlight, no big speech, just that one line. And the way his eyes lit up made it feel like the first time he opened the door to this place all over again. Somewhere in the room, someone smiled through their tears. Because when a space holds both failure and forgiveness, it becomes more than a business. It becomes a memory people want to keep. The room was quieter now, but not because it was empty. It was that kind of quiet you only get after something real has happened. At table 4, a college kid leaned toward her friend, whispered, "I'm definitely coming back here." Her voice wasn't meant to be heard, but it reached the right ears anyway. At a booth near the window, Noelia reached across the table and grabbed Arvid's hand. He smiled, not with his mouth, but with his eyes. They didn't say much. Didn't have to, because something had changed. Not just the food, not just the staff. The air felt safer. Like maybe this place had become the kind of room where you didn't have to prove you deserved to be here. Not with your accent, not with your shoes, not with the size of your tip, just by being human. Leora stayed near the counter, still holding the now crumpled tissue. Her shoulders had dropped, but not from shame anymore. Just relief. She wiped her eyes once more, this time slower, like she wasn't rushing to hide it. Then Cedric walked by. Didn't say a word. Just gave her a little nod, the kind you give someone who's been through it, not out of pity, but respect. She nodded back. A hint of a smile curled barely there. They didn't hug, didn't shake hands, but somehow something passed between them anyway. Something that said, "You're not alone in this room anymore." And for a place once divided by silence and stares, that quiet, unspoken thread felt louder than all the noise from earlier. Somewhere deep inside her, Laura didn't feel forgiven. She felt seen. The crowd had quieted again, but Harlan still stood, tall, gnarled fingers wrapped around his cane. There was one more truth left to say. He looked down for a second, as if searching the floor for a memory he'd buried there long ago. Then he said, "When I was broke, hungry, and dead tired, someone reached out and helped me stand." A pause, not for effect, for the weight of it. They didn't owe me anything. They didn't ask for thanks. They just gave me a place to sit, a warm meal, and dignity. He looked up again. That act built this place. Not money, not walls, that kindness. His grip on the cane tightened. Not from anger, from remembering how far he'd come. And today, his voice softened. That circle closed. Because sometimes what we give away in our lowest moments finds its way back to us in ways we never expect. Harlan turned toward the staff again, his people. Not just the cooks and servers, but the humans who made this place more than chairs and menus. From this day forward, he began, Maple and Hearth will serve more than just food. A beat, the room leaned in. We'll serve dignity, respect. A seat at the table that doesn't ask who you are, just asks if you're hungry. Someone sniffled near the kitchen. No more letting the world harden us. No more surviving off scraps of kindness. His eyes scanned the room. Cedric, Leora, Martha, Arvid. Every face now lit by something new. We feed stomachs, sure, but we're going to feed hearts too. He didn't need applause. He didn't need to be remembered. He just needed the next shift, the next server, the next stranger walking in from the cold to feel like they mattered. And now they would. Somewhere near the back, a spoon tapped gently against a plate. Not harsh, not impatient, just the soft rhythm of someone finishing a warm meal without hurry, without tension. That small sound, barely there, echoed louder than all the shouting from earlier. A child laughed at table 6, not the nervous kind, but the full-belly deep kind that made their dad laugh too. Their mom shook her head and smiled, like maybe it had been too long since they laughed like that in public. The room was different now. Same tables, same floor, same lights, but the air had changed. No more side glances, no more clenched jaws, only shoulders relaxing, minds softening. The kind of peace that doesn't come from silence, but from safety. And for the first time in a long time, this place didn't feel like just a restaurant. It felt like home. Harlan didn't speak again. He didn't need to. He just watched the room. Not with pride, but with something gentler like relief, and then quietly in the space only he could hear a thought rose to the surface. Kindness costs nothing, but it can change someone's whole life. He didn't say it out loud, but the way he looked at the people, their eyes, their posture, their stillness, it was clear they'd heard it anyway. Because sometimes the truest things don't need a mic. They just need to be lived. That thought stuck not just with Harlan, but with Cedric, with Leora, with every guest who walked out that day and held the door open for the person behind them. Somewhere, someone repeated it over dinner. Someone else wrote it down in a notebook, and someone, maybe the quietest one in the room, carried it like a stone in their pocket, something small but heavy and true. Harlan stood still for a long moment, as if giving the room one last look, not to remember it, but to let it remember him. Then, in a voice low and steady like it had carried both storms and silence, he said, "What changes this world isn't punishment. It's the chance to become better." No one moved. No one needed to. He took a breath, then added softer but sharper, "If it were you, would you choose to punish or to forgive?" The words didn't hang in the air. They landed. Not like a speech, like a mirror. No applause this time. No music swelling, just stillness and the echo of a question that only the listener could answer. Somewhere, a chair scraped gently against the floor. Someone whispered to their child. Someone paid for another's meal on the way out. And Harlan, he just turned, walked toward the door, and left the room behind. But the question, it stayed.